Hello, and welcome to another resource from the webinar library of the Community Microgrid Planning Academy at the Center for Resilient Design at NJIT. My name is Marc Pfeiffer, and this is a deeper dive into microgrid policy and procurement issues raised in previous webinars. This is the second of two webinars on the subject. This one is an overview of the public policy challenges and a review of procurement issues that must be resolved in order for community microgrids to move forward. The first webinar was an overview of the government context and risk that must be analyzed when a microgrid is being considered. Regrettably, these webinars don't provide a lot of answers, but are intended to highlight the issues that need attention and resolution. So let's get into it. The first thing we want to talk about are public policy questions, and microgrids raise a lot of them. Public policy problems usually require state laws or rules to address them and provide guidance to local officials on how to implement them. When issues are uncertain, we often use pilot programs. They can combine flexibility with reporting and oversight and limiting of risks and costs. They are ways to experiment and learn from leaders who are willing to take measured risks. Community or town center microgrids, as we've been calling them in New Jersey, have deeper challenges because they are new. While other states are experimenting with them, the range of policy options and technical issues are continuing to evolve. This is providing one of the biggest challenges with microgrids because we're trying to think ahead of where they're going to be going. We need to try to postulate what the challenges are, what the questions that need to be answered in advance, so that when we start building them, they are built effectively and designed to work. So let's dig into this, for example. So one of the first questions we have to deal with is, can microgrids exist with existing laws? Can they coexist together? Well, most of our existing laws did not anticipate the development of town center microgrids. For example, the state's Electric Discount and Energy Competition Act, known as EDICA, that did not anticipate microgrids. That was passed in 1998. Social benefit charges similarly, though we have redeployed them to help support a microgrid planning grant process, that was not designed to deal with a microgrid environment. We also have a wide variety of current policies on renewable and non-renewable distributed energy generating resources that also were developed in the absence of considerations of microgrids. So the answer is microgrids can exist, but laws and rules that were designed for specific purposes regarding electricity have to be reconciled. And because town center microgrids require standards and consistencies between many participants, industry technical issues related to grid interconnection and interoperability, supply and distribution management, and even construction codes need to be resolved by standard setting organizations. Fortunately, because microgrids are something that are receiving national attention and are at work on in campus type environment, these things are already happening, but we need to make sure we integrate them into our existing laws and rules. Our next question is, how do they relate to existing electrical distribution companies, or EDCs, like Public Service Gas and Electric and Jersey Central? Well, in these cases, these are distribution systems where a microgrid will effectively partially replicate and supplement them. And incumbents EDC systems must be capable of integrating with a proposed town center microgrid. And because a microgrid can also help an EDC during peak periods, but will incur costs because of it, the impact on ratepayers will have to be assessed as well. So we have to understand how microgrid reliability, maintenance, generation, costs, and rates, and the collective impact of these issues will have internal and external impacts on a municipality. That will happen. Our job now is to try to predict what they will be and how we're going to deal with them. Understanding that potential of unanticipated consequences is critical. Gaining this understanding will let us do informed policies that will make microgrids easier to deploy and implement. Our next point is, how can a municipality go into the electricity business? Well, actually, we've had just under a dozen municipalities that have run their own electrical utilities since the 1950s, and actually some of them predate the 1950s. We have a set of statutes that talk about that, and we have to now adapt that toward more municipalities who are going to be doing a very limited electrical system that covers just part of their town, where the existing practices and laws deal with serving an entire municipality. We're going to have to think about what type of oversight there's going to be, what the responsibilities will be, most importantly, what the relationships with third parties who will inevitably be running these systems for the municipality. Most municipalities clearly don't have any experience in this, and they're going to be relying on experts who will advise and guide them on it. So we want to make sure that those decisions that are made are going to be sound, given the limited experience that existing officials have with them. So a municipality has to think about a couple things. Current laws, for example, to start an electrical utility in a municipality require a public referendum and petitions in order to get them on the ballot and then a successful vote of the public. Is that something that's going to be necessary for microgrids? The legislature is going to have to take that question up to figure out, well, how do we want to approach this? That system we currently have was developed in the 1950s. Is it appropriate for microgrids? My thinking is that microgrids are going to need a separate model because it's not covering the entire municipality and is going to be basically implemented by private contractors. That's something that we have to deal with. And finally, does the speed of technological change affect the decisions we make? And the answer to that is yes. All right. Changing technology affects generation services, for example, solar panels. Those prices are going down over time. We're talking about developing wind-based energy. We're making improvements on biomass, but we also have to think about metering. Is that how will these electrical services be charged? What will be the access to and from the grid they're going to need? What will the pricing be? What will be the distribution and billing challenges that have to be met? Some of these may be big issues, some may be small, but there's things on the table that decision makers are going to have to. And we got a couple more. So beyond the state getting the grid and microgrid operators to cooperate, what is the role of the state going to be in supporting local microgrid efforts? Should the state provide financing or other incentives for them? Should it also be in the business of approving local town center microgrid plans to provide an independent look at proposals and contracts to ensure that the actions of the municipality are sound? We also might want to think about to what extent should the ratepayer advocate be involved in local rate setting issues? Do local municipal officials need do local residents need a third party to oversee or make sure what the government is deciding their rates should be makes sense? That may not be an issue, but it's a question that needs to be asked. We also want to think about what does an elected official need to think about? Well, you've got high uncertainty and risk. That has to be balanced about the perception and needs of voters. And what we normally have is a very dynamic political environment in New Jersey. That's, a nice way of saying that local politics matter. A clear development and reporting model with appropriate checkpoints for decision making has to be developed to ensure that local officials are making sound decisions in an appropriate manner for something that is brand new. That's something that we've got to figure out, what will that process be. We also need to think about pricing. Do we pay only when the system is used, or does the municipality pay availability costs? And of course, when a municipality pays something for something to be available, it's the taxpayers that are paying for it. And how will that work? What will the impact be on municipal budgets, on property tax levies, or will there be utility charges? We're not sure how that's going to work because we've never tried to do this before, not only in New Jersey, but anywhere else. We can learn from what we do with the EDCs and how they bill and charge and how their tariffs are done. But again, these are things that we haven't thought about yet, and we need to take into account. We also have to think about how we're going to deal with pricing of services from those distributed energy suppliers. Those folks in town who will have generators or solar panels, and they will be able to plug into the microgrid to provide power. How are they going to get compensated, or do they not get compensated? These are challenges that we have to deal with. And are there any other policy issues that have to come up? Well, there's going to be things we don't see yet. We're kind of guessing on some of these right now, but once we really get into the weeds on these things, once we learn from our feasibility studies that are currently being done, we'll have a better sense of how to proceed with that to develop state legislation and policies that can make these things a reality. So, how does the government actually go about buying and installing a microgrid? Well, that's really the question. But really, before you have to get that, we have to get to feasibility studies. Is a microgrid feasible? And there's really, I think, four elements that we want to look at for that. The first element is the need for a feasibility study, and you're going to need a reliable third party that's going to study it. A municipality has to have confidence in that a contractor doing that work is not compromised by business relationships with organizations that are solution providers. That contractor, that consultant has to be free of conflict and bias in their analysis, and the municipality has to be that clear and only client when it comes to studying a microgrid in a municipality. Second point is you start with a well thought out scope of work. A request for proposals for a feasibility study has to be developed so potential organizations will provide useful proposals. You start by finding someone else that's done something like it and adapt to your circumstances. Then we're going to use a public request for proposal process to find that qualified organization to conduct the study for us. You want evaluation criteria that will reflect knowledge of the subject matter, will reflect professional and technical expertise, and ideally the consultant will understand how New Jersey government works. After review and evaluation by the municipality's professional staff or consultants, an award of that contract would be made by the governing body. And finally, the study's conducted. If the microgrid is found feasible, then you're going to want to conduct a risk analysis. That risk analysis is going to look at the financial, operational, legal, and construction operational risks and costs that support a microgrid project. That might be done as part of a feasibility study, or it could be an addendum to the study or a subsequent standalone effort. You may not want to pay for a feasibility up front, or rather you may not want to pay for the risk analysis up front unless you're pretty sure that a microgrid is going to be feasible. And finally, you want to avoid making assumptions. And it's so easy to do in an environment where we want to solve this problem and we see all kinds of solutions being put in front of us to do that. But we want to try to rely on data. We want to avoid technology based on promises that can't be observed. And we want to deal with the circumstances in individual municipalities. So once we get that feasibility study, procurement issues now can kick in, and that's a little bit of a problem. So procurement issues address how a municipality will acquire the services they will need to successfully manage, construct, maintain, test, operate, and assure system reliability. Procurement also includes administration of contracts that are made during the construction project and their management once operation begins. Now, New Jersey has a long history of requiring a lot of procedures and processes to ensure integrity in public purchasing. They are intended to avoid favoritism that can lead to excess expenditures of public funds. Current procurement laws, however, that these things that regulate municipalities do not adequately address the challenges presented by a town center microgrid. While consultants can be hired to get the project started, when you get to construction and operation, our current system breaks down given the special unique needs of a microgrid. So let's dive into what some of these problems are. The first one we want to think about is who runs the project, how are they chosen, and how is the public protected? This may require some new approaches in how public construction projects are evaluated given the uncertainty in how a town center microgrid will be designed and operated. One of the important elements is that microgrids most likely are best designed and operated by a single vendor. And our current laws do not allow the notion of a design, build, operate, or maintain contract or public-private partnerships as approaches to developing and managing microgrids. This is a challenge we have in a lot of public construction, where our traditional model is that the local government issues full specifications and then contractors bid on the work and the lowest responsible bidder is chosen. This requires a slightly different approach given its complexity and the need to have pieces all merge and integrate together. An assessment of legislative changes will be needed and should be integrated along with other challenges. Let's see. So we have, how are contracts made with the business and organizations who are part of the microgrid? Well, here we're going to need to require right-of-way and easements onto private property that may host distributed energy resources, and we have to address liability issues that can come from that. Contracts with third-party power suppliers need to be developed and tested. How pricing will work in normal times and critical need times will also need attention. How changing conditions will have to be negotiated. We'll have to think about lengths of contracts, how we integrate evolving technology, and also not get too caught in with vendor lock-in that leaves us with a vendor that isn't working out very well. All of these things have to be developed to work in a New Jersey public environment. And as with all procurement activities, it is necessary that the challenge be met with an ethical and transparent evaluation and pricing process consistent with state and local laws and practices. There are probably going to be some other elements that are going to pop up, as we found when we were doing public policy and looking at risks, but they will present themselves as issues are analyzed, and then they will need to be assessed and integrated into the process. And there's still a couple things we haven't discussed and we're not going to get into much more detail on, but construction financing and operating cost issues. Once we're going to decide to go forward, the feasibility study came out great. We are now figuring out how we're going to do this, and we're going to bring ourselves a contractor. We need to figure out how we're going to pay for it up front and also deal with operating costs. These are critical things that we just have to figure out how we're going to do to manage that. Following that is making sure we have public support for it. Residents of a municipality have to understand what the government's going to do, what the value they're going to get from it's going to be, and they're also going to have to understand that there's costs that are going to come up as part of this. And finally, we have to deal with sound project management practices. More public projects fail because management did not oversee or have a robust reporting process that can be used to spot problems and correct them before they get worse. I can't emphasize this issue enough. Any microgrid plan needs to have a good plan for project management and then project administration that has to be executed, maintained, and monitored. You want to know how the job is doing, how it's going, what the potential for cost overruns are going to be, and then once it's up and operating, making sure that maintenance is done as required, that the processes that are necessary to maintain and operate this type of a project work on a going forward basis. So at the end of the day here, being a trailbreaker is never easy. Local officials that believe a community microgrid is an opportunity to address their power resiliency challenges need to work with state officials to resolve the public policy and procurement challenges so there is a clear path to moving forward. Having a sound feasibility study, having smart advisors, a sound risk management plan, a contracting process, and carefully studied financial plans will go a long way to gain public support for the development and implementation of community microgrids. That's it for this webinar. This is the end of part 2. On behalf of the NJIT Center for Resilient Design, we hope we found this useful. Thank you very much.